The doorbell rang at the Stork family's apartment. Michael opened the door. Standing on the doorstep was his friend Liam. He was with his family, wife Gloria, and 3-year-old daughter Amelia. Michael, hi. So, just like we talked about, we leave our beauty in your care. I hope she doesn't miss you too much in 3 days, Gloria said. Gloria kissed her daughter, and Liam winked at the baby. Be good, listen to Uncle Michael and Aunt Wendy, and we'll get you the biggest doll you'll ever see. The day before yesterday, Michael Stork told his wife that the Smiths were leaving for 3 days in the capital and asked her to look after Amelia. Wendy nodded, although in her heart, she was dissatisfied with her husband's decision. She did not argue. Wendy and Michael had been married for 10 years. All these years, they had dreamed of having a baby, but it hadn't worked out. They had been to doctors more than once. They were told that her husband was healthy and that Wendy had a minor abnormality. It was treatable, it just needed time. Time passed. Wendy underwent more than one course of treatment, but she still couldn't get pregnant. She even began to think that Michael blamed her for everything and might eventually leave her. Wendy loved her husband and couldn't imagine being alone. A child, which she already wanted very much, was becoming an obsession. Wendy did IVF, but to no avail. In desperation, she even went to a fortune teller once. Then the woman drank some disgusting tasting and smelling herbs for 6 months until she developed gastritis. That was the end of her treatment attempts. Once, Wendy even started talking about taking a baby from the orphanage. Michael, however, was adamant. Wendy, no. We won't even know who his parents were, what disease they had, what kind of heredity the child has. No, the question is closed. Period. If we are not allowed to be parents, then so be it. Michael was very attached to his friend's daughter. The two couples, Stork and Smith, were friends. Michael always came to visit the Smiths with gifts for their daughter Amelia. He would spend the whole evening with her playing. Sometimes he could hardly be persuaded to sit down at the table. The child's company seemed to be more important to him. Wendy felt superfluous and unnecessary. She couldn't get pregnant, so he played with someone else's and looked very happy. Gradually, Wendy began to feel annoyed. No, she did not show it outwardly, but deep down, she knew that she did not like the fact that this child would take away her husband's attention, even for a couple of hours. So, when Michael confronted her with the fact, she didn't give anything away. She was very unhappy. For 3 whole days, this child would be spending time with Michael, and she wanted to go shopping with her husband and then go to a premiere at the theater in the evening. She also had someone else's baby to babysit, but Wendy wouldn't cross her husband. She understood that not having children of her own, Michael found in Amelia an outlet. Wendy could not deprive him of that joy. You'll have to be patient. It's only 3 days. I can handle it, Wendy decided. So, Wendy, do you mind? Sure, tell Liam and Gloria we look forward to seeing her, Wendy replied to her husband. Liam frequently went on business trips and sometimes took Gloria with him. And so it was this time. She had a 3-day trip to the capital city, and Gloria asked to go with her husband. I haven't been to the capital for so long. Don't even mind, I'm going with you. And we'll leave Amelia with my mother. But Gloria's mother suddenly fell ill. It was nothing serious, it was just a common cold. But they still did not dare to leave Amelia with her. They were afraid. In the end, Amelia's parents made an agreement with the Stork family. They promised to look after their daughter. Have a safe trip, Wendy, and I would be glad. We adore Amelia, Michael promised. The 3 days flew by unnoticed. The time seemed fleeting to Michael, but not to Wendy. Michael really enjoyed spending time with the baby. He even fed her himself and took her for walks in the evenings. He read books to her and played games. Wendy was heartbroken to see it. It should have been her and Michael's daughter or son. The stranger's child annoyed Wendy more and more every day. She counted the days and hours until Smiths arrived on the third day. They received a call from an unknown number. It was the police. Michael's phone was the last person Liam had called. They were told that while Leo and Gloria were driving to the airport, the car had an accident and no one survived. This had happened an hour earlier. The police asked about close relatives and asked them to come to the Capitol for identification. Michael listened to it all as if in a dream. Michael traveled to the Capitol on his own to be identified. Smiths had no family except for Gloria's mother. The woman was admitted to the hospital with a heart attack when she received the terrible news. No one could help but be nice to her. Wendy, Michael said before he left, nodding at Amelia. The poor girl is all alone. Wendy didn't like it, but she knew this was no time to argue. Besides, she too was depressed by these events. The hospital reported that Gloria's mother had died of a second heart attack. Of course, Michael. We'll get through this. The main thing is to be careful. After Michael left, Wendy was left alone with the baby. She understood that Amelia was not to blame for anything. Wendy was even surprised to feel sorry for the little girl who had not even begun to live and was already all alone. Poor thing, she's going to have a hard time at the orphanage, Wendy thought as she prepared dinner for the girl. During her husband's absence, Wendy managed to restrain herself. Taking care and worrying about the baby occupied all her time. There was no time to think about getting rid of the girl. It's only for a few days. Soon, Michael will settle all the formalities, and the girl will be placed in an orphanage. These thoughts made Wendy feel more confident. After all, one way or another, everything would soon be over. But it turned out that Michael had plans of his own. We need to talk, Wendy. Sit with me, Michael said, closing the door to the bedroom where Amelia had just fallen asleep and sitting down on the couch in the living room. Wendy sat down beside him, and her husband put his arm around her and kissed her. Darling, I have fought long and hard about this situation. You know that Amelia is an orphan. Michael's parents are long dead, and Gloria's mother just passed away. The little girl has no one. She will be taken by social services and given to a shelter any day now. We can't keep her with us much longer. We are officially nobody to her. Wendy thought it would really be better if they took her away from them sooner rather than later. She was tired of pretending to be happy at the sight of a stranger's child. So, Michael continued. How would you feel about us adopting Amelia? Liam was my best friend, and he loved his daughter very much. Liam dreamed of a wonderful future for Amelia. How are we going to live with the knowledge that the unfortunate little girl will spend the next few years in an orphanage? Maybe someone will adopt her. Wendy's rash words snapped. But when she looked at her husband, she shivered. What are you talking about? Don't you feel the least bit sorry for the baby? Besides, we have no children of our own, and I don't really believe we ever will. Wendy sank. He's right, hearing Michael's last words. Wendy sank. He's right. While she remained silent, her husband added, Do you remember how you once suggested that I take a baby from the orphanage? I refused. Then I was afraid of the consequences, but we know Amelia's parents. We knew. Michael was silent. Wendy was still hesitant to tell her husband that she didn't want to adopt the girl because she was afraid that Michael would have Amelia's full attention and that her husband would stop paying attention to her. After 6 months and tons of bureaucratic paperwork, the Stork family officially became parents to Amelia. Michael did not want to change the girl's last name. Let the memory of his friend Liam and his wife Gloria remain forever. Michael also immediately suggested that Wendy not hide from Amelia the fact that they were not her mommy and daddy. The girl had lost her parents when she was 3 years old, and she remembered a lot. Even though at first, Amelia cried and asked where Mom and Dad were, Michael managed to help her through that hard time. After a while, Amelia began to call her new parents Daddy and Mommy. Wendy felt that Amelia treated them differently. The girl would never approach her, never ask her for anything. Amelia was clearly drawn to her father. But as of late, that didn't bother Wendy. After all, she was finally happy. She had had her long-awaited pregnancy. It happened just when she had given up hope. It was the day she and her husband got their hands on the Amelia papers that Wendy suspected something was wrong and bought a pregnancy test. The evening was the adoption party, and Wendy was so radiant sitting at the table that Michael said, "You see, Wendy, how right I was when I suggested Amelia's adoption. Now you've seen it for yourself. I can see the happy look in your eyes." Wendy only nodded to her husband. She decided to save the news for later. Alexander was born weak, and for the first time, Wendy did not leave the baby's side at night. She jumped up at the first cry and carried her son in her arms all the time. With the birth of her long-awaited son, Michael began to spend even more time with Amelia. "I don't want my daughter to feel less loved," he said, taking the girl for a walk in the park. Wendy, on the other hand, was now able to leave the girl's care entirely up to her husband and attend only to her son. That's how they lived. Michael was perfectly happy to have a daughter and a son. A couple of years earlier, he thought he'd spend the rest of his life as a father. Wendy was happy too. She now had a reason for living. She had been worried before about Amelia taking all her husband's attention away from her. But now, she was even happy about it. Alexander had become everything to Wendy. Before, she had never imagined what it was like to love her child. Now she was willing to do anything for Alexander. Even Amelia's presence in their lives barely irritated her. It was mostly Michael who took care of her. In first grade, the girl discovered her aptitude for music. Michael personally took Amelia by the hand to the music school. There, she auditioned and was accepted. Michael was happy. Wendy, imagine how happy Liam would be for his daughter if he were alive. You'll see, she'll surprise us all yet. Hush, Michael. You'll wake Alexander, and it's too early to talk about success. Time will tell. Time has really shown. Amelia didn't just have ability, she had a real talent for music. A synthesizer was bought for her so that she could practice every day. The instrument came with headphones, and music lessons did not interfere with her little brother's sleep. Over the years, Wendy had learned to hide her dislike of Amelia. And she didn't dislike her so much, rather, she was simply indifferent to her. No, she did everything a good mother should do. She babysat Amelia at night when she was sick. She took her to music school. The girl was well-dressed, well-shod, and always had her hair nicely combed. Michael did not allow Amelia to have her hair cut, and she had long, thick braids. They weren't easy to take care of, but Wendy didn't mind. In the mornings, she got up half an hour early to comb Amelia's hair. Besides understanding how much her husband was attached to Amelia, she tried not to upset him. At the same time, Wendy did all this mechanically because it was the right thing to do. She knew that's what good mothers are supposed to do. They are supposed to take care of the baby. Can you believe Amelia is growing up so ungrateful? Wendy once complained to a friend. We do everything for her. When we sent her to music school in the first grade, we bought an expensive synthesizer right away. Her clothes are the best, her computer is the latest model, her husband changes her cell phones every year, and she is rude to me. Wendy was lying. Amelia wasn't always rude. Honestly, she hardly ever acted like that. It was just that one day, it was about her dead parents, and Wendy had been careless enough to imply that had it not been for Michael's kindness, Amelia would have ended up in an orphanage. Since then, Amelia has changed a lot. If she behaved normally with Michael, she was sometimes aggressive with Wendy. What do you want from a teenager? They're all like that. Now she's only 14 years old. She's difficult to deal with. My son's the same way, Bridget replied, pouring herself and her friend some tea and moving a vase of jam closer. The friends spent the evening pouring out their hearts to each other and parted pleased with each other. Amelia was finishing 10th grade when a terrible tragedy struck the family. Michael had gone fishing on a distant lake. On the other side of the lake, some teenagers were swimming. It was early May. The water had not yet warmed up. One of them had a leg cramp and was drowning. Michael rushed to help. The lake was big, and he swam to the place where it happened, already pretty tired. The man began to dive, trying to find the teenager, but in the end, he couldn't make it to the surface. He drowned. Wendy was not just hurt by the tragedy, it was as if the woman had stopped living. No, she existed, she was breathing, but it was like she was dreaming. She stopped being interested in what was going on around her. Nothing could bring her to her senses, neither psychologists, nor friends, nor children. Wendy was in a state of apathy. Amelia had to take care of Alexander and the household. She did homework with her brother, took him to practice in the sports school, cooked meals, cleaned the floors and dishes. Wendy continued to lie in bed around the clock. This went on for 4 months, then Wendy gradually began to come to her senses. It was as if she had awakened from a dream and was surprised to see that it was autumn, that Alexander's school jacket had become too small, and that her own hair had grown back and turned gray. Being completely absorbed in her grief, Wendy thought of no one and nothing. Meanwhile, Amelia was also experiencing her father's death very hard. She just couldn't afford to lie down and cry into her pillow all day long. Who was going to take Alexander to practice? Who was going to make him breakfast? Amelia longed to go to her mother, to hug her, to weep, but Wendy looked like she didn't dare. Instead of drawing closer from the tragedy that had befallen them, Amelia and Wendy finally drifted apart. One day, Wendy realized that since Michael was gone, she no longer had to pretend her love for Amelia. One day, Amelia overheard Wendy discussing with a friend that she had put up with Amelia all her life because she could not go against her husband's wishes. After graduating high school, Amelia went to college and went to live in the apartment she had inherited from her deceased parents. While she was in school, she continued to study music. With the beginning of her adult life, her talent came in handy. Singing and playing the piano became Amelia's livelihood. A very young girl, she could support herself and not depend on Wendy, with whom she simply stopped communicating. Wendy constantly complained to her friends about Amelia. How much effort and money has been invested in her upbringing and education, and now she has run away from home and is no help at all. Michael should see what an ungrateful daughter he has grown up with. Wendy had almost stopped communicating with Amelia. They only called once a month to see how things were going. But her brother, Alexander, whom Amelia loved very much even though he was not her brother, often came to visit her. Meanwhile, Wendy's temper began to deteriorate. Tragedy played its part, and as she grew older, some changes began to appear. Wendy became irritable, resentful. She often cried when looking at pictures of Michael. The woman felt that life had treated her terribly and that those around her didn't want to see how bad she felt. Conflicts began at work. At first, her colleagues were patient with Wendy, considering that she had lost her husband and suffered severe depression. But as time passed, Wendy became increasingly unbearable. She demanded special conditions for herself, scandalized with colleagues over every nonsense, on any remark reacted to tears and hysterics. On top of all this, her health began to fail. It began to change the pressure. Wendy began to go to the doctors, then to a cardiologist, and then to a neurologist. In the end, the boss offered her resignation. Wendy was already entitled to a pension, especially because of her age. A month after being fired from her job, Wendy complained to her friend Bridget. "No one wants me now. Alexander has his own company. He's hardly ever home. He's at school, he's at competitions. If I get sick, no one will give me a glass of water. And don't even mention Amelia, she's ungrateful. After she moved into her own apartment, she didn't give a damn about me. How am I? What about me? She is not interested, she does not call me and does not come to visit me at all. Bridget just shook her head. But Wendy was lying. Amelia, knowing that her mother had been forced to quit her job and Alexander was in competition, brought her groceries once a week. Wendy complained about not feeling well, and Amelia did the cleaning, loaded the laundry, ironed the laundry, and washed the dishes. Wendy, on the other hand, sat in her room with a sorrowful face, looking over old pictures of Michael. Before Amelia left, Wendy was sure to reprimand her that she rarely visited, that she didn't care about her mother. Her mother also reproached Amelia for forgetting to buy her medicine, probably just sparing her money. At such times, Wendy felt so miserable and infinitely lonely that sometimes she would end up in tears. Amelia would try to get away as quickly as possible. Ungrateful, I wish you would run away as soon as possible. You don't pity me at all, Wendy thought in her heart as she closed the door behind Amelia. Amelia would have liked not to go to her mother at all, but Alexander was never home. Who else would help? One day, Amelia received a tempting offer to sing at a karaoke club in the capital. Of course, no one would give her anything so easily. The girl would have to prove that she had talent. Yes, it was not easy for her to go to distance learning at the institute, but it was a unique chance. Amelia really wanted to take it. This chance was the memory of her father, who always saw her daughter as a talent, who took her to private tutors in addition to the music school. In fact, her father believed in Amelia very much, and she should try it at least for his sake. Amelia thought for days about how to tell her mother. She would reproach her for ingratitude again, and maybe she would cry, she would feel bad, and then what would she do? While Amelia was waiting for the right opportunity, disaster struck. Wendy had a stroke. She began to feel ill right in the middle of the store. The woman called an ambulance and was taken to the clinic, where she was diagnosed with a serious illness. Wendy spent a month in the hospital. The doctors did everything they could. Wendy's life was not in danger. As for bodily functions, however, the circumstances were not good. The right side of her torso was paralyzed. There was no facial expression, no speech, and her arm did not work. Now, all that was needed was time to recover. There was no guarantee that Wendy would recover. However, they did not say that there would be no progress. Doctors explained that with proper care, her mother could eventually recover almost completely. Needless to say, Amelia had to turn down the offer. She didn't go anywhere. The girl only shared her disappointment with Alexander, but both brother and sister understood that their mother's life and health were more important than any career. It was very hard for her at first. All the responsibilities were on Amelia. She had to feed her mother, change her clothes, wash her, and change her underwear. And she also had to do exercises with her, go to physical therapy and massages. Of course, Amelia moved back to her parents' house because she needed to stay close to her mother all the time. At first, Amelia was close to despair. It seemed to her that her mother would never be able to recover. Even though Alexander helped in any way he could, Amelia still had only herself to rely on. Then, 6 months later, improvement began to appear. There was a positive progression. Wendy was able to say short words and move her fingers, and on the day she was born, she could even smile. Alexander and Amelia had an impromptu feast right at her bedside. Their mother held a spoon and ate the cake herself. Their mother's smile made them both feel very happy. They felt so much hope for her recovery that this was the best birthday Amelia and Alexander had ever had. While Wendy was recovering, Amelia was spending as much time around her as she had never spent, even as a child. Wendy suddenly realized to herself that she did not know her daughter at all, and worse, she had never sought to know or love her. A willful prejudice against another man's child, which had taken some of her husband's attention away from her, had prevented her from even trying to love the girl. Now, seeing Amelia take care of her, feeling the need to be near her more and more, Wendy had rethought a lot of things in her life and in her attitude toward the girl. Now she was ashamed and embarrassed to remember how she had seriously competed with 5-year-old Amelia for Michael's attention, how little attention she had given her, how much motherly warmth the girl had missed because of her silly, far-fetched fears. Wendy wanted to explain many things to her daughter, to share her thoughts, but her illness prevented her from doing so. And seeing how Amelia cared for her, Wendy cried all the time. One day, seeing this, Amelia suddenly put her arms around her mother and said, "Mommy, don't cry, please. We love you so much, you have no idea. You'll get better soon, you'll see." That day, as Amelia and Wendy cried in each other's arms, the last wall of misunderstanding and resentment disappeared between them. A year later, Wendy was sitting in a wicker chair on the balcony on the 10th floor of the sanitarium. She had been walking and talking on her own for a long time. There were minor effects of the illness in the form of stiff facial expressions and a not-so-fast gait. Otherwise, Wendy was perfectly healthy. "You have no idea, my friend, how nice it is here. The air is cypress, you can drink it, not just inhale it. And what a view of the sea. Amelia will come here in a week, she has work now. Didn't I tell you she's been working in the capital for a month? She's very talented, she sings like that. It's unbelievable. How could it be? Did she really leave you alone, Wendy? Maybe you were right to call her ungrateful. Who told you such nonsense? I have the best daughter in the world. She's the reason I live. After Michael died, I had a dream that he and I were walking in a field, both so young, and a little girl was running toward us. Michael took her hand and handed it to me, saying, "Someday you'll live because she's here." Only now did I understand what the dream meant. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.